Hi, I'm CJ, and you're listening to Teach Me, one of my canon-inspired JiKook stories. You can find the written version of this and all my JiKook books and stories on my Patreon at www.patreon.com/cjmoon, or the original video on my main YouTube channel at youtube.com/@cjmoonwrites. All links are also available in the video description. If you're watching as well as listening, hit the CC button to turn on subtitles. YouTube can auto-translate as well as auto-dub the audio from English into the language of your choice. So settle in, get cozy, and I hope you enjoy the story.
Jungkook raised his hand to knock, then lowered it again. He hung his head and scuffed the toe of his Timberland on the tile floor, maybe subconsciously hoping something or someone might come along and interrupt him. But it was late, and the other members who were home were probably all in bed by now. How many times was it that he had tried to get the courage to knock now? 2, 3? Still, he couldn't bring himself to do it. It had taken all the bravery he could muster just to leave his room and bring himself to Jimin's door. Now that he was here, he wasn't sure if he could go further and actually face him, but what choice did he really have? Today had been awful, beyond awful even. One of the worst days Jungkook could have even imagined happening that didn't involve more dieting. There had been a long schedule, interviews, photo shoots, meetings with stylists, everything gearing up for the next comeback. They had been shuffled from point to point, uncomfortably piled in and out of the minibus too many times to count, and through the whole thing Jimin had just been so polite. Ugh, he wished he had a better word for it, because of course his Hyung was always polite, but these days Jungkook could sense a difference. This wasn't about not grumbling because they didn't have time for lunch again, or being stuck in traffic and running so late they wouldn't have time to get their makeup touched up properly before going on camera. This wasn't just general politeness to everyone. This was personal politeness directed at him specifically. And he hated it. Jimin still smiled at him, but no longer reached his eyes. There were no flirty comments, no ostentatious gestures of affection. No times where he clung to Jungkook's shoulder while doubled over laughing. Fan service was still a thing when the cameras were rolling, sure, but at all other times, everything was just as polite and proper as it should be between brothers. It seemed that all the years Jungkook had spent pushing him away had finally ensured Jimin was firmly back on his side of the "hey, we're just het bros here" line Jungkook insisted on drawing. And having finally achieved what he had always thought he wanted, Jungkook realized it was precisely what he definitely didn't want at all. So why had he done it? He had been questioning himself about that for a while now, even if he would never admit it out loud. He wondered why he still pushed each time he felt a drop in his stomach when Jimin would no longer hold his eye contact. He wondered even more late at night when he was alone in his own bed, craving the warmth of his Hyung's body at his side, but was now afraid to even try to set foot in Jimin's room, let alone ask to sleep in his bed. He longed for the nights they spent cuddling against each other. Finding comfort from the hatred the world seemed to be throwing at them at the moment wrapped in each other's arms. At first, the attention from Jimin had been so overwhelming he didn't know how to react. His Hyung was so open and confident, so full of genuine love and affection, while Jungkook was so unsure of himself. When they were in interviews, Jimin never seemed to worry about what to say. He spoke from his heart, gushing openly about his love for ARMY and the other members, answering each question astutely. Jungkook was always terrified he would make a mistake and say something stupid. He had never been great with words, and now, when there were cameras everywhere, recording everything, Jimin was so elegant and beautiful. While most days Jungkook still felt like the dorky kid from Busan he was when he first arrived in Seoul, and considered it a victory just to avoid having an anxiety attack while being filmed. Because of this, he was more than happy to leave the spotlight to his Hyungs whenever he could, having gotten more than enough already as center of the group. He had never considered his behavior might seem cold to some people. Besides, he thought Jimin knew him better than anyone, and he hadn't seemed to mind that much at first. As they grew older, the more vivacious Jimin was, the more Jungkook retreated into his shyness as a way of trying to protect himself. He was drawn to Jimin like a moth to a flame, bright, warm, and fascinating. But as he went through puberty, he started to realize that maybe the tingles he felt when Jimin touched him meant something more, because he definitely hadn't felt those same feelings when he had tried dating girls. But even though in theory he accepted what was happening, he had no idea what to do about it, so he buried it. So in essence, Jungkook was pretty sure it all started because he was an idiot teenager who had no idea how to interact with someone who made him feel things he wasn't used to feeling. And that was normal, right? But they didn't call him the Golden Matinee for nothing, and Jungkook never did anything by halves. At some point, it was almost as if his competitive nature had taken over, and he just couldn't stop it. This push and pull between them might have started as a game, but Jungkook didn't like losing games. He always played to win. Winning was safe. It meant he was in control. So he bottled up any of his feelings and pushed relentlessly, determined to get Jimin to stop the flirting that left him feeling a bit breathless, to stop all the gestures that Army had already noticed had distinctly romantic overtones. He convinced himself those weird tingles he felt about Jimin were just nerves about being in front of the camera. If Jimin flirted, it made him look uncool in front of the fans, didn't it? He was supposed to be an idol, a heartthrob to millions of girls. The way he turned into a stupid, blushing, stammering mess when Jimin came on too strong was embarrassing. So in his mind, he was right to push him away. It was the grown-up, responsible thing to do, because it would be bad for the group if Army realized that in actuality, he wasn't anything like the bad boy concept the agency wanted them to portray at the moment. The problem was that Jungkook had dug himself so deeply into this persona who ranked Jimin last and rebuffed his advances. Jungkook didn't notice that he had actually come to enjoy the affection, to rely on it even. It was in Jimin's constant nearness and touch that he found the strength that sustained him during stressful times. Times when the cameras were rolling and the microphones were shoved in their faces. In fact, he had started to take it for granted so much that when Jungkook had casually reached out and put his arm around Jimin's shoulder today during an interview, he was truly shocked when Jimin pushed it forcefully away. Okay, maybe he had been acting a bit possessively, trying to replace Hobie's arm with his own, but something in him felt really ugly when he saw someone else with their hands on Jimin. At first, Jungkook felt humiliated by the public rejection. His jaw went tight, and his tongue poked into his cheek as he carefully schooled his features into a plastic smile, something pleasant enough for the remainder of the interview. In the background, he fumed over the incident as Jimin continued to teach the interview a bit of the new choreo, completely unbothered, until with a crushing horror, it dawned on him that this rejection was exactly what he had been doing to Jimin for years. If anything, Jimin's rejection of him was more gentle, just a gesture rather than hurtful words as well. This humiliation and frustration he was feeling now, did Jimin feel the same each time Jungkook had pushed him away? And if so, how is it even possible that Jimin didn't hate him? How was Jimin even still speaking to him if he had made him feel like this? Unless maybe Jimin had really meant all those gestures, all those things he had said, that he really and truly cared that much. Oh God, Jungkook was so embarrassed he wanted to crawl back into the bus and hide the rest of the day, and it ached that he had to keep his fake grin in place for hours longer until he could get some privacy to nurse his wounds. He realized now that he had been letting his foolish pride get out of control. He hadn't known when to stop, and he had made a mess of all of this. He had won the stupid one-sided game he had been playing, but lost so much more. For nearly 2 hours now, since they had all piled out of the minivan and back into the dorm, he had been lying on his bed trying to decide what to do. He had cried at first, sorry for himself and his bruised ego. He had wallowed in self-pity thinking about what he might have lost. But eventually the tears stopped, and he came to the conclusion that no one could fix this but himself. This is what came of refusing to face his feelings, he reasoned, and if he had ever actually stopped and analyzed his own behavior, he would have seen this coming ages ago. But then, when did they ever have time to stop and think about anything? Jimin had been so open and honest. His Hyung was unable to be anything other than authentic. It was Jungkook who had been unaware or unwilling to accept what it all meant. All the nervous shadowing during the day and seeking out shy cuddles under the covers at midnight. He was head over heels in love with Jimin, and in a bro kind of way. He loved his eye smile and his mochi soft cheeks. He loved the way he felt when he was wrapped up in Jimin's arms, and the softness of Jimin's lips when they brushed up against the nape of his neck when he thought Jungkook was asleep. With his soul finally bare and the truth acknowledged, it was time to stop avoiding the situation. All he needed to do was to clear his head, and he was certain he could figure out how he could fix this whole mess. What would Nam Junhyung do? Or Jung Hyung? Both were good at having difficult but necessary conversations. Jungkook had thought of more than a few ideas, but hadn't actually decided on a plan of action until he heard the door to the room next door open and close. Suitcase wheels scraping along the tiled floor of the hallway reminded him that Hobi Hyung was headed to the airport, grabbing a night flight for a whirlwind schedule in Japan. He'd be gone for just 2 days, but it meant that in that bedroom, Jimin was alone. Within seconds, Jungkook was standing at the door. Okay, first step accomplished, but he still hadn't gotten the courage up to knock, which was a logical step 2 in the plan. He didn't actually have a step 3, but if he thought too much more about that, he'd run straight back to his room again. This indecisiveness was why he was standing with the hood of his black sweatshirt pulled up over his hair, one hand tucked in the pocket of his ripped jeans, and the other mid-air when fate once again intervened in his life and the door in front of him opened. Jimin stepped back, startled to find himself face to face with an even more shocked-looking Jungkook. Jungkook, you scared me. He peeked down the hallway, possibly looking for Ho-sok, but the dance leader was long gone. What were you doing outside my door? The maknae quickly ducked his head, embarrassed at being caught. Jimin Hyung, I was just coming to see you. Jimin ran his hand through his dark blonde hair, casually pushing his bangs back off his forehead before level back in place. He could see Jungkook was nervous. He kept his distance. The tension between them was palpable, the silence heavy. Jimin continued to watch Jungkook's face closely, but he had already decided the only way to protect himself was to let Ook lead from now on. He had seen one too many comments under YouTube videos from supposed fans of Jungkook's, accusing him of throwing himself at Jungkook, who they protested hated Jimin and were near him. Jimin knew that it wasn't true, or at least he hoped it wasn't. Some days the way the maknae behaved, he wasn't sure. Either way, he was already nervous that one day management was going to kick him out of the group because he was gay, and having a gay member could be a lot of trouble. There was no way he was going to risk hurting Jungkook by allowing him to be put in a similar position where he incurred the wrath of their audience. So as much as he wanted to reach out and comfort him, Jimin pressed his lips into a tight line and tried to be patient. Sensitive Jungkook had never been good at hiding his emotions, and it hurt Jimin deeply having to watch the younger struggle as the silence dragged on, but he just couldn't do this anymore. He was trying to be firm with himself. He reminded himself of all the times Jungkook had pushed him away, and there were only so many times one could be rejected and made to feel like a fool. Honestly, if it was just that, Jimin could have dealt with it, but the idea that his behavior might be hurting Jungkook as well was intolerable. He loved him far too much to allow him to be hurt. Jungkook stammered, looking for the right thing to say. No matter how painful the silence got, Jimin did nothing to alleviate it. He crossed his arms, leaned his shoulder against the door frame, and tried to look indifferent while one expression after another flitted across Jungkook's face. Each created a different constellation of emotion in the maknae's galaxy eye's embarrassment, regret, nervousness, fear, and Jimin felt them all. When Jungkook lifted his head to meet Jimin's eyes, the elder could see he had been crying. Would it be okay if, can we talk? He peeked over Jimin's shoulder into the room. It was mostly dark with only the small lamp on the desk for illumination. The bed was still made, though, so he didn't think Jimin had been trying to sleep yet. Jimin studied his face for a moment longer, then relented. He backed up and, still keeping his expression neutral, gestured Jungkook into the room he and Hoseok shared. When the door closed behind them, Jimin didn't bother locking it. He knew their privacy would be respected. He suspected that the other members were already aware of and uncomfortable with this growing rift between him and Jungkook. The team were too close to hide anything, especially when they were together practically 24/7. Namjoon especially would want it sorted as quickly as possible. Anything that disrupted the chemistry of the team was bad for Bangtan. The members, too, respected them and would happily give them as much time and space as they needed to get through this. Jungkook looked around for a place to sit before opting to pull the chair from Jimin's desk piled with sunglasses and jewelry over to where Jimin sat down on the end of his bed, one foot tucked underneath him. He wanted to be near him and would have preferred to sit next to him, but he didn't dare try. He was too nervous to touch him, despite how much he himself was aching to be touched. Jimin was still silent and distant as Jungkook adjusted the hood of his sweatshirt again, then leaned forward and absent-mindedly, he cracked his knuckles on one hand while he tried to figure out where to start. Jimin Hyung, I'm sorry, he said quietly, his head bowed. Jimin blinked. This wasn't at all what he expected to hear. You're sorry? Sorry for what? Jungkook's voice was a painful whisper, so quiet as he tried to continue. If the room hadn't been deathly silent, it would have been difficult to catch his words. I'm sorry if I made you mad in some way. I think I know what it was, but I'm not sure and I don't want to assume, but whatever it was, I'm sorry. I would never want to hurt you. He wouldn't meet Jimin's eyes even after he stopped speaking. Instead, he kept his head down as he chewed on his slightly chapped lip. Jimin let out a long sigh and shook his head as he looked at the young man he had loved for so many years now, since they were both children really. He was very much ready to believe the Maknae was the other half of his soul, and they were fated to be together. But Jungkook also confused and frustrated him. He was the most handsome man Jimin had ever set eyes on, and he loved everything about him, from the strong line of his chin to the curve of his calves, from the moment he set eyes on him, but most of all he loved his shining soul. His existence was a gift, and Jimin knew other members agreed with him. He lit up not just the room, but your life when he became part of it, and Jimin loved him with every ounce of his being, which is why his heart ached for what Jungkook was going through as much, or maybe more than, what he himself was suffering. No matter what had happened, though, no matter what may happen in the future, Jimin believed without a doubt they were fated to be together. There was a gravity between them that was undeniable. In one capacity or another, they would be in each other's lives forever. That Jungkook hadn't come to see that quite yet caused them both pain. But there was no way Jimin would ever be angry with him for it, just as the sun wouldn't scold the moon for sometimes hiding in the earth's shadow. The emotions they shared were so strong they threatened to overwhelm them both at times, and he completely understood why Jungkook would be frightened by the power of them. Eventually, Jimin had convinced himself that by pulling back he would make things easier on them both, and try to reassure himself that Jungkook was just young and only needed time. Well, time was something Jimin could give. They had plenty of it. While they were still contracted to Big Hit, neither of them was going anywhere. I'm not mad at you, Jungkook, he said resignedly as he pushed his hair back away from his forehead again. Why would you think that? I thought. Jungkook fidgeted as he struggled to find an answer. But Hyung is behaving so differently lately. I thought I had done something to make you upset with me. Jungkook kept his head down, his long bangs hiding his eyes as he continued. He was worried that if he met Jimin's gaze, he'd cry again, and that couldn't happen. He wanted Jimin to see him as strong enough to be an equal now, a partner, not the child he had once caught crying in the kitchen about missing his family. He was an adult finally, or at least would be soon enough here in Korea, since it wasn't long until his birthday. How officially grown up he was could be more confusing when they were touring, because depending on which country they were, he might or might not be able to do stupid stuff such as drink beer, which he understood but still thought was a bit silly. Besides, since he had been living away from his family since he became a trainee at 13 years old, surely that counted extra when it came to maturity. He was certainly old enough to know what he wanted now, and it was crystal clear to him that what he wanted was sitting on the bed in front of him. If only he could be brave enough to reach out, and if only he hadn't already ruined it. Jungkook shook his head, his shiny dark hair flicking from side to side as he sought to clear his thoughts. It might take him longer to find his words sometimes, but when he did, they were the right ones, and he meant them. When he lifted his head to look at Jimin, his eyes were clear and gaze was resolute. He was ready to confess his feelings, but first he wanted to understand. You pushed me away, Hyung. In front of everyone. You pushed me away. Why did you do that? Oh, Jungkook. Jimin's head tilted to the side, and he smiled at Jungkook softly, the first real sign of tenderness or emotion since they had entered the room. He had to restrain his natural reflexes to keep from reaching out for Jungkook's hand to comfort him. Jimin would have been justified if he reminded Jungkook that he had done the same thing to Jimin 1,000 or more times before, but he wouldn't because that would be petty at a time like this. But neither did he feel the need to apologize, even though he had known the minute he had done it that his action had hurt the magne's feelings. Does it matter? This is the way you want things to be, right? No. No. Jimin looked at him quizzically, before a soft laugh of disbelief escaped. Again his fingers swept through his hair. What do you mean, no? How can you say that after all the no homo, bro reminders and all that? Jimin was trying to keep the edge out of his voice, but years of frustration and pent-up emotion made it difficult. He already regretted pushing Kooky away today, but what else could he do anymore? It was Kook who had drawn the line, not him. If it were up to Jimin, well, there wouldn't be boundaries, lines, or indeed anything else between the two of them. Jungkook, you made it clear you don't want to be close to me in that way, and I respect that. I accept that, or at least I'm trying to accept it, but it's hard sometimes. When you touch me, his voice broke. He could see the emotion in Jungkook's eyes, the honest affection he knew the maknae held for him, and it was just too much. He was trying to get past this desire he felt for Jungkook, but his love for him just ran so deep. It's too hard, Kooky. I just can't. He paused and swallowed hard before continuing. This is how it has to be, Kook. If we are going to be just friends, then we can't. Jimin broke off mid-sentence when Jungkook rose quietly from his chair and approached him. No, Kooky, don't. He put his hand up in a motion to stop him from getting any nearer, afraid of being unable to constrain his feelings much longer. But Jungkook only grasped it and softly entwined their fingers together. Ignoring Jimin's protest, Jungkook sat next to him on the edge of the bed, drawing their linked hands into his lap. Jimin's eyes closed, and he shook his head. Even just the feeling of their hands together threatened to overwhelm him. Can't you see I'm doing this for you, Jungkook? Jimin's voice was hoarse, but he was trying to make light of this all, and he tried his best to smile through the pain. I can be strong for you, but the least you could do is at least try to make it a bit easier on me. Jimin squeezed Jungkook's hand playfully before trying to slip his fingers free, but the maknae, hearing the strain in his voice, lifted Jimin's hand to his lips and placed a feather-soft kiss on the back of it. Don't play with me anymore. Please, Jungkook, Jimin whispered. Please. I can't bear it. For a moment they were silent. Jungkook's thumb absent-mindedly made soft stroking motions across Jimin's knuckles. The pause was heavy with emotions, with possibilities that both of them were so aware of, yet neither felt the need to voice them. To the public they were megastars, on their way to becoming international pop royalty. But out of the public, they were just two young men with the same frailties and insecurities as anyone else. Finally, it was Jungkook who broke the silence. You have always been a strong one, Hyung. Jungkook reached his second hand over, taking both Jimin's hands between his own. You have always watched over me and protected me. Even when I pushed you away, you were there for me. I'm so grateful for that. Jimin allowed his fingers to be captured between Jungkook's, but kept his eyes averted. It was the easiest way to keep his emotions under control. He could keep from crying as long as he was quiet and didn't speak too much. He concentrated his attention on the warmth of Jungkook's hands. It soothed him. Jimin drew more strength from this touch, this connection than the maknae would ever understand. It was killing Jimin to have to hold back, to try and keep the fragile barrier between them in place. But he had promised himself he would never again do anything to make Jungkook feel uncomfortable. If this is where Jungkook wanted their relationship to be, then this is where it would be. Oh, Jungkook, I will always be there for you. Always. He gave Kooky's fingers an affectionate squeeze. You know you're my dearest friend. Through their touch, Jimin could feel Jungkook go tense for a moment before relaxing again. Jungkook laughed softly. Really? I'm your dearest friend, am I? The soft teasing in Jungkook's voice confused Jimin, forcing him to finally lift his eyes to Jungkook's face. His voice had been tender, but was there a hint of bitterness in it? Was Jungkook's jealous streak peeking out even at a time like this? What do you mean? Of course you are. Who else would you think? Jungkook could have left it here. The old Jungkook would have scrambled to retreat back to Broland before he had to do any self-examination of his feelings. He would just laughed it off and given Jimin a quick high five over it. But that wasn't going to be enough anymore. His gaze dropped, eyes settling on Jimin's lips. But don't you want more than that? More than friends? Jimin's heart skipped a beat. Then another. Jungkook, don't ask me that. Please. This isn't about what I want. Jungkook continued to hold one hand while lifting his other tentatively toward Jimin's face. Jimin couldn't even breathe as he felt its shy stroke trail across his cheek before Jungkook cupped it affectionately under his chin in a move that wasn't clumsy, yet still showed his relative inexperience. Jimin's heart melted. Jungkook had never tried to touch him so tenderly before. You're always so clever, Jimin, but this time you're wrong. And I ask about what you want. I've been so selfish all this time. And stubborn. But I understand now. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize it, but now I know that what you want and what I want is the same thing. From where it rested under his chin, Jungkook's thumb swept out and across Jimin's full lips. His hand was trembling. Their eyes were locked on each other, neither daring to blink nor breath, lest this moment they both had yearned for disappeared. Are you certain, Jungkook? Are you really certain? Because I couldn't bear it if, Jimin whispered. His voice was raw with emotion. Honestly, I'm terrified, the matinee admitted. I'm scared of opening up to you and getting hurt. You'd have every right to reject me after the immature way I've acted. I'm scared of people finding out, and us making a mess for the other Hyungs. I'm scared of how this might hurt Army. The words came out in a rush. None harsh and all honest. But honesty is what they needed more than anything now. For too long, he had been dishonest with himself about his feelings, and all that had done was bring pain to both him and to Jimin. But most of all, I'm terrified of losing you, of losing a chance to be loved by you. I'd never stop regretting it if we didn't at least try. Jimin smiled at his words. They mirrored his own feelings exactly, but that was no surprise. They were two sides of the same coin, really. The sun and moon, circling each other endlessly all these years. So close, but never quite touching. Until now. Slowly Jimin tilted his head closer, making his desire known, but not wanting to push Jungkook into anything he wasn't comfortable with. He needn't have worried. Jungkook was already moving towards him so quickly it was a shock to Jimin when their lips met sooner than he expected. The kiss was lingering and tender, and it was perfect. When their lips parted, he could taste salt from the tears Jungkook had been crying earlier. His poor Kook. Instinctively, he wrapped his arms protectively around him and pulled him closer. Careful not to spoil the moment by pressing too quickly, Jimin pulled his head back just enough to be able to gauge the look on Jungkook's face to make sure he was okay. Jungkook's whole body tingled with the sensation of this first kiss. The feel of Jimin's lips finally pressing against his own was overwhelming, and his heart was about to burst as Jimin's arms moved to encircle him. He wanted this more than he had ever realized. Jimin was everything to him, his whole world. How could he not have known this before? He met Jimin's eyes with new wonder. The look on his face was one of shock. He tried to speak coherently, but words were hard to find. Jimin, I don't know how to say this. I'm not sure how, but... Jimin held his breath and tried to read the look on Jungkook's. But years of rejection had conditioned him, and his heart fell. This was the part where Jungkook rejected him again. He was furious with himself already. He was the Hyung here and should have been more responsible. He shouldn't have let this happen. He should have stopped Jungkook, not allowed them to get swept up in the moment. Kissing boys wasn't for everyone, and Jimin should have known it wouldn't end well. Now he just hoped it wasn't too late, and he hoped Jungkook wouldn't hate him for it. Oh, I get it. It's okay, Kookie. I know. He cleared his throat and tried to keep his voice level as he reluctantly released Jungkook from his embrace and started to shift backwards on the bed to put some space between them. No. Jungkook shook his head in agitation. No, Jimin, you don't know. Please, let me finish. Please, don't pull away. Jungkook wasn't going to let this pass. He wasn't going to let Jimin pretend this was only an accidental happening, a brief moment to be hidden away secretly or to try and forget. Since the beginning, their relationship had always been the same. Jimin pursued, and Jungkook rejected. That was before, and that was over. With new determination, Jungkook's hands reached for either side of Jimin's face. He held him there, not roughly, but firmly enough Jimin knew he was serious. Jimin, I want this. I want us. This isn't some whim or curiosity. I've known now I've been in love with you for so long, even if I didn't know how to express it. I want us. I want to be together with you. As a couple. As boyfriends. There, he'd done it. He'd actually said it out loud. The look in Jimin's eyes was priceless. In all the times Kooky had goofed around or done something silly to try and make Jimin smile, he had never seen anything approaching this level of bliss. Jimin's cheeks blushed a gentle pink. He was glowing, not willing to be apart another moment. Jungkook leaned forward and pressed his lips urgently to Jimin's again before he lost his courage, kissing him hungrily over and over as his hands slid from Jimin's face down, across his shoulders and down his back. He needed to make sure Jimin knew that he understood. Jimin needed little encouragement. He had been waiting too many years for this moment. The sound of the surprised gasp Jungkook made when Jimin's tongue finally found his will stay etched in his mind forever. I want this, Jungkook whispered between kisses. Jimin's kisses were dizzying in their intensity. It felt like every nerve in his body was on fire. Jimin, I want. Jimin didn't let up his attack on Kooky's lips. He bit at them once gently, then again slightly more firmly before he whispered back. What, Jungkook? What do you want? He teased, and a small satisfied smile appeared on his lips when he heard Kook moan softly. For a brief moment, Jungkook was able to right his senses long enough to respond. His dark eyes met Jimin's head-on and held them as he kicked away the last barrier between them with a ferocity. You part, Jimin. I want you. I wanted you for so long. There would be no going back from this moment, but neither of them cared. From now on, together. Please. Jungkook leaned into Jimin, using his weight to push him backwards on the bed. Not that there was any resistance. Before his head could even hit the pillow, Jimin's hands were at Kook's waist, pulling at the waistband of his hoodie, searching underneath for the warmth of his bare skin. Their lips were parted only to catch the occasional breath, the necessity of which was an annoyance to both of them. Jimin used the excuse to press his lips to Jungkook's ear. I've always been yours, Jungkook. His teeth caught at Jungkook's earlobe, biting gently but possessively as his fingers traced the line on his back where bare skin met the waistband of his jeans. Always. The noise that came from Jungkook's throat was part purr and part growl. He pushed himself to sit upright, straddling Jimin between his thighs as he grabbed the waistband of his hoodie and ripped it and the t-shirt that was underneath off over his head before reaching for the buttons on Jimin's shirt. His hands were shaking as they fumbled hurriedly, trying to undo them. The look on his face as he surveyed Jimin underneath him was one of fierce and frantic lust. Jimin could see Jungkook wasn't playing around anymore, and the thought more than excited him. But beyond that, there was still his primal urge in him to protect Jungkook at all times. He had known him since he was 13 years old and knew exactly what experience he had, or didn't. It would be so easy to allow himself to get carried away by the emotions of all of this. But whatever happened tonight, Jimin's priority was to ensure Jungkook had no regrets. He slid his hands up Jungkook's exposed abs, watching in appreciation as the muscles tensed under his fingers. He hoped one day, soon to be able to dedicate hours and hours to Kook's gorgeous stomach. Then stretching his arms up to him, Jimin pulled him back down on top of him so he could wrap his arms around Jungkook's neck. He reached his mouth up to Jungkook's and started to kiss him steadily again. But gently, patiently. He could still feel Jungkook's heart pounding, but he was starting to relax as Jimin deliberately slowed things down. This was good. Left to his own pace, Jungkook did everything at top speed, and that was definitely not going to help tonight. With the back of his hand, he stroked Jungkook's face as they kissed in just the way he had been dreaming of doing for so many years. It was everything Jimin had been hoping it would be, and so much more. When the time seemed right, he shifted in such a way that he could gently push Jungkook off the top to lie next to him. Their legs were intertwined as their hands continued to roam each other's bodies. Jungkook had managed to undo the rest of the buttons on Jimin's shirt, and his hand slipped up and down the front of his smooth chest before finally coming to pause on his belt buckle. But Jimin was already alert, and the hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Jungkook. Jimin's voice was so quiet it was little more than a whisper. He was so afraid to break this beautiful spell. Are you sure you want to do this? I mean, we don't have to do anything more. We have all the time in the world. He moved his hand to rest it over Jungkook's, where his fingers had started to work the leather strap free of the buckle. At Jimin's words, Jungkook stopped what he was doing and drew back to look into Jimin's eyes. Why was he questioning him? Jungkook had already told him he wanted this. Wait, did Jimin not want it? Was this way of telling him? He looked at Jimin quizzically. What do you mean? Well, it's just I know you've never. Jimin didn't have to finish his sentence. Jungkook knew what he was trying to say. He had never been intimate with a man before. Girls, yeah. More than a few fumbling times, all lackluster, as he tried to convince himself that maybe it was just the partner and not his lack of attraction to women. In truth, he had stopped thinking of his relationship with Jimin as being in love with a man anyhow. That line of thinking had been part of the problem and led to way more guilt and self-loathing than there ever should have been in the first place. What did it really matter what gender a person was anyhow? We get no choice in which body fate puts the other half of our soul, and he firmly believed all would be a lot better off in this world if we stopped worrying so much about it. To Jungkook, he was just Jimin, and he was part of him. No, I haven't, but I know you have. He's seen Jimin sneak off with partners after award shows and year-end gayos. Each time, his soul burned with jealousy. Now he recognized it was because he wanted to be in their place. Jungkook laughed nervously while moving both their hands from where they had been resting on Jimin's belt buckle. Instead, he took Jimin's fingers and placed them on the button fly of his own jeans. He looked at him nervously. Teach me. With a soft smile on his face, Jimin's nimble fingers undid the button of Kook's jeans and slid open the zip. Despite the bold words, he could tell Jungkook was still nervous by the way he bit his lip, so Jimin moved extra slowly. It was never like this, though, Kook. Never someone I cared about the way I care about you. He let his touch linger, allowing Jungkook to get used to what was happening before moving on. Jungkook's eyes closed softly as Jimin's hand reached in and closed around him. The pleasure surged through him as for a moment Jimin just held him and allowed him to get accustomed to the intensity of being touched. But always a quick learner, it wasn't long before Jungkook started rocking his hips back and forth, aching for more friction. Taking it as a sign he was ready for more, Jimin got to his knees on the bed and started to pull Jungkook's jeans down. He kept his eyes on Kook's face the whole time, watching closely for any sign that he might be uncomfortable, until with a final tug Jimin could toss the jeans into the corner of the room. Jungkook lay there below him, completely bare. This wasn't the first time he'd seen Jungkook naked, of course. They had done hundreds if not thousands of costume changes together by now. So, of course, he'd already seen every inch of Jungkook's body at one point or another. But context was everything, and this was definitely the first time he'd ever seen Jungkook naked as a lover. It was, well, breathtaking. For a moment, all Jimin could do was stare. So handsome. Jungkook, you were just so beautiful. Jungkook blushed, and it definitely did nothing to lessen his attractiveness. While Jungkook lay back on the bed, Jimin rose and stood next to it. He shrugged the open shirt from his shoulders, then slowly started to remove his trousers. Jungkook watched every move, his eyes possessively following Jimin's hands with their intent gaze. Knowing that Jungkook wanted to see him naked was such a turn on, and as if he wasn't hard enough already, watching the look on Jungkook's face as he finally removed the last of his clothing made him ache. But this wasn't about him. Not this time. This time it was all and only about Jungkook. Jimin climbed back on top of JK and stretched out along him. The feel of their skin touching in so many places sent sparks through them both. Jungkook's hands wrapped around Jimin's back as Jimin reached in to nuzzle at Kook's sensitive neck. He was gentle at first, a butterfly kiss followed by a soft stroke of his tongue, but as Jungkook's breath quickened, Jimin increased the pressure, sucking hard at the tender skin. If he left a mark, so be it. If it were up to him, he wanted the whole world to know that he had been lucky enough to make love to Jimin Jungkook. He snapped his teeth at the hollow beneath Kook's ear and felt him thrust his pelvis forward in response. Jungkook couldn't believe how Jimin was making him feel. Every touch set a new fire of flame on his body. It was a storm that seemed to come from everywhere all at once. He didn't want to lose control too quickly, but it was taking every drop of concentration he had to try and keep it together. He focused on his breathing, trying to make it deep and steady as he felt Jimin's lips slip down his throat and onto his chest. When Jimin's warm mouth covered his nipple, he lurched forward in response. "Oh fuck, Jimin, it feels so good." His voice was husky and raw with emotion. Jimin smiled inwardly and flicked his tongue across Jungkook's hard bead of a nipple before allowing him a moment of respite. "Good," Jimin laughed. "It's supposed to." Jungkook opened his eyes and reached up to punch Jimin playfully on the shoulder. Jimin was relieved to see Jungkook playing like this. It meant he was relaxed. "Do you know what else would feel good, though?" Jimin grinned. Jungkook bit his lip as he gave Jimin a questioning look. He didn't have to wait long for an answer, though, as Jimin ducked his head again, dragging his mouth across Kook's solid abs, stopping every so often to nibble at the taut skin. Jungkook's hands moved to his shoulders first, and then he felt his shaky fingers run through his hair. Below him, he could feel Jungkook's cock twitch in anticipation, hoping he knew what would happen next. Another time, Jimin might play with him by dragging it out. He might tease him, edge him, make him beg. But that was for later. Tonight was about making Jungkook feel safe and loved. He kept the pace steady. A kiss, a scrape of the teeth. He ran his tongue across Jungkook's belly button, then nibbled at the soft hollow near his hip bone. As his mouth got lower, Jungkook's hands stilled on his head. His breath was coming in deep heaves, and when Jimin peeked up to have a look, he could see his eyes closed and his mouth open. His face was flushed, and in Jimin's opinion, he had never looked more beautiful. Jimin couldn't make him wait any longer. The feeling of Jimin's full lips and warm mouth wrapping around him was a bliss Jungkook never imagined could exist. So wet and so soft. His head arched back, and he let out a deep, primal, satisfied moan. At this moment, nothing else existed for him. It was him and Jimin only, as it always should have been. Jungkook's breath became deeper and faster as Jimin cupped his hand under him and worked his mouth along the length of his hardness. He couldn't move, he couldn't speak. He lay there, a trembling, beautiful mess. He was powerless to do anything now, completely at Jimin's skillful mercy until with a final release, he exploded into a shower of stars. As he floated, he was dimly aware of Jimin moving to wrap his arms around him, so that when he finally came down from it all, he was snuggled securely up to Jimin's chest. His face was wet with tears. "Jimin, JiKook." Jimin pulled him in closer and stroked his hair. "Just take a moment." Jungkook lay still in Jimin's arms until his breathing returned to a more regular pace. He had never felt more at peace. Why he spent so long fighting against this, he'd never know. But Namjoon always said that each day was a chance for a new beginning, and from now on he wanted each one to be with Jimin. After a few moments, his heartbeat came back to normal, and he lifted his head. He rested his chin on Jimin's chest and looked up into his handsome Hyung's face. "Jimin, he teased, intentionally dropping the honorifics. They kind of seemed a bit out of place when they were both lying here, naked anyhow. Jimin just grinned. He couldn't believe how happy he was. Having Kook in his arms like this was a dream come true. "Yes, Jungkook, Jungkook laughed at the shared joke and poked a finger into Jimin's ticklish side. "Saranghae," Jungkook said before snuggling down into his arms again with a smile on his face. Jimin dropped a kiss onto the top of Jungkook's head and hugged him tightly. "I love you too, bun," he whispered. "Now get some sleep. I'll be here." Worn out from the emotion and physical exertion, it didn't take long for Jungkook's breathing to become the deep and even breathing of slumber. Softly, Jimin released him from his embrace and gently climbed out to grab the blanket just out of his reach at the end of the bed. He was grinning like a fool as he tucked it tenderly around his sleeping Jungkook, ensuring he was warm and safe. Jungkook shifted but didn't wake. Jimin picked up his book from the bedside table out of habit and settled on the floor next to the bed. It was too dark to read, and he wasn't sleepy, but he certainly wasn't going to leave Jungkook's side. Not now, and if he had his way, not ever. Surprisingly, he wasn't actually worried about what JK's reaction would be tomorrow. There wasn't even a lingering panic about being pushed away anymore. It might still happen when Kook got nervous or scared, but tonight Jimin had come to understand how Jungkook really felt about him, and that was enough. Before JK fell asleep, Jimin had told him he would be there for him, and he meant it. When he shifted again to get comfy with his back against the mattress, Jimin tipped his head up to read the clock on his desk. It read midnight, 0 o'clock, a new beginning, and he knew for certain they were going to be happy.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please remember to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when new stories are released. The written version of this story and all my JiKook stories are available on my Patreon at www.patreon.com/cjmoon. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a fabulous day.